What should have been the happiest day of Amy Slaton's life almost turned into a complete disaster, and it started only days before the wedding. Because just as the final preparations for the ceremony were happening, Amy made a decision that shocked everyone around her. She decided to go through with eye surgery right before walking down the aisle. Yes, you heard that right. Only days before the biggest moment of her life, Amy was sitting in a doctor's office, being told that both of her eyes would need surgery. Not just one, both. And suddenly, the dream wedding she had imagined for months began to feel incredibly uncertain. Because what if the surgery went wrong? What if the swelling didn't go down in time? What if she walked into her own wedding looking like she had just come out of a hospital? But the medical risk wasn't even the biggest problem. There was something else hanging over the entire wedding like a storm waiting to break. Her relationship with her sister, Tammy Slaton. Fans of 1000 LB Sisters already know that Amy and Tammy's bond has always been complicated. They love each other deeply. But their relationship has also been filled with arguments, misunderstandings, and emotional distance. And as the wedding got closer, that distance seemed to be growing again. Tammy had barely been involved in the wedding planning. There were conversations that never happened. Moments when Amy expected support and instead felt silence. Tammy did receive an invitation, but according to Tammy, something about it felt wrong. She said she never heard Amy say the one thing she truly wanted to hear, that Amy actually wanted her there. So while Amy was preparing for surgery and trying to focus on healing, another question was quietly spreading through the entire Slaton family. Would Tammy even show up to the wedding? Because if she didn't, the absence would be impossible to ignore. And if she did show up, there was always the risk that the tension between the sisters could explode at the worst possible moment. Meanwhile, Amy was about to face something even more frightening. The surgery itself. When the doctor examined her eyes, the news became more serious than she expected. The problem wasn't just cosmetic. Her eyes were misaligned in a way that required correcting both sides. That meant operating on the eye she depended on the most, her dominant eye. For a moment, Amy hesitated. This surgery could change the way she looked and potentially improve her confidence for the rest of her life. But it was happening only days before her wedding. Most brides would cancel immediately. Amy didn't. She decided to take the risk. And when the surgery was finally over, the first thing Brian noticed when he saw her again was something that made the moment feel almost terrifying. Her eyes were red, swollen, watering heavily. At one point, it even looked like tears mixed with blood were coming from them. The doctors reassured them it was normal after surgery. But the timing could not have been worse. Because the wedding was getting closer, and Amy still didn't know if her sister Tammy would be sitting in the audience or missing completely. As the ceremony approached, the entire family started asking the same question. Was this wedding about to become a beautiful family celebration? Or another chapter of Slaton family drama? And what happened next, just minutes before the ceremony started, is something no one in that room expected. Because suddenly, the doors opened. And someone walked in. Something was supposed to be simple. A wedding. A celebration. A moment where a family that has survived years of struggle could finally stand together and feel proud of how far they had come. Amy had imagined that moment many times, walking down the aisle, seeing smiling faces instead of worried ones, hearing laughter instead of arguments. For her, this wedding was not just about getting married. It felt like proof that life was finally moving forward. But the closer the day came, the more that peaceful picture began to feel fragile. Because behind the decorations, behind the dress fittings, and behind the excitement, everyone tried to show on the outside, tension was quietly building. Some of it had been there for years, old frustrations that never fully disappeared, feelings that had been pushed aside when life became too busy or too difficult to deal with them. Now those emotions were starting to surface again, and the timing could not have been worse. Amy wanted everything to go perfectly. She had spent weeks thinking about every detail, the ceremony, the music, the way the family would finally gather together for something. happy instead of another stressful situation. After everything she had gone through in the past few years, she wanted this day to feel different. She wanted it to feel peaceful. But there was one problem that kept returning to her mind no matter how hard she tried to. Ignore it. Tammy. Their relationship had always been complicated. Anyone who had watched their journey could see how deeply they cared about each other, yet at the same time how easily. Misunderstandings and emotional wounds could appear between them. There were moments when they supported each other completely, and there were moments when the distance between them felt impossible to close. And as the wedding approached, that distance seemed to be growing again. Tammy had not been as involved in the wedding planning as Amy expected. There were conversations that never happened, invitations that felt less personal than they should have been, small details that might not have meant much to anyone else, yet to Tammy they carried a deeper meaning. From Tammy's perspective, it started to feel like she was slowly being pushed to the side. She did receive an invitation, and technically everything was fine. No one told her she could not come. But there was something missing that she could not stop thinking about. Amy had never come to her directly and said she truly wanted her there. For someone else, that might seem like a small detail. For Tammy, it meant everything. Because for years, their lives had been tied together in a way that few siblings experience. They had supported each other through medical struggles, emotional breakdowns, and countless moments where things felt completely overwhelming. Their bond had always been complicated, but it had also been incredibly strong. Now Tammy began to wonder if that connection was slowly changing. Meanwhile, Amy had worries of her own. The wedding was approaching quickly, and in the middle of all the planning, she still had one more major decision to make, something she had been thinking about for a long time, something that meant a great deal to her personally: her eye surgery. For years, Amy had dealt with a condition that affected the way her eyes looked and moved. It was something she had grown used to living with, yet it still affected her confidence in ways she rarely talked about openly. The idea of finally correcting it felt incredibly important to her. And now she was close to getting approval. There was one final appointment left, one final conversation with the doctor that would determine whether the surgery could actually happen. As the day of that appointment arrived, Amy felt a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. Part of her was hopeful. She imagined the possibility of finally seeing her, reflection, and feeling fully comfortable with what she saw. But another part of her worried about the timing, because the wedding was only days away. If the surgery happened now, there was no guarantee that her recovery would be quick or easy. Her eyes might still be red. They might still be healing. The results might not fully settle before the ceremony. Yet at the same time, this opportunity might not come again anytime soon. When Amy finally sat down with the doctor, she tried to stay calm while listening carefully to every word. The conversation began with an explanation of what the procedure would involve. Then, the doctor looked closely at her eyes and described what needed to be corrected. Amy listened quietly, hoping for one specific answer. Was she approved for surgery? The doctor paused for a moment before giving the answer she had been waiting for. Yes. The relief Amy felt in that moment was immediate. After years of thinking about this possibility, she was finally close to fixing something that had always bothered her. The surgery could happen. But then, the doctor continued explaining the details, and the situation became more complicated than Amy expected. It would not be a simple adjustment. Both eyes would need to be operated on. The doctor explained that the issue was not only about one eye drifting outward. There was also a difference in the way the eyes aligned when looking up and down. Correcting that required working on both sides. For Amy, that information brought a sudden wave of anxiety. Her left eye had always been the one she thought about fixing. That part felt understandable. But her right eye was different. That was her dominant eye, the one she depended on most for clear vision. Hearing that it would also need surgery made the situation feel much more serious. Amy tried to process everything the doctor was saying. She understood the medical explanation. She understood that the goal was to improve her alignment and overall vision. But emotionally, it still felt frightening. She had waited a long time for this moment, yet now the reality of the procedure made her realize how much trust she would need to place in the process. Eventually, she made her decision. She would go through with it. The surgery was scheduled quickly, and soon Amy found herself preparing for the procedure, while still thinking about the wedding that was rapidly approaching. For Brian, watching Amy go through this experience brought its own set of emotions. He wanted to support her and stay positive, yet he also could not ignore the concerns that came with the timing. The idea that her eyes might still be healing only days before the ceremony made him nervous. Still, Amy remained determined. This surgery represented something meaningful to her. It was not just about appearance. It was about confidence, about feeling like she could start this new chapter of her life without carrying the same insecurities that had followed her for years. When the day of the surgery finally arrived, everything happened quickly. Doctors prepared the operating room. Amy was guided through the process. The procedure itself took time, but eventually the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The surgery was finished. The doctor later explained that everything had gone according to plan. The corrections had been made successfully. From a medical perspective, the procedure could not have gone better. For Amy and Brian, hearing that news brought an enormous sense of relief. But the recovery process was only beginning. When Amy first opened her eyes afterward, the effects were immediately noticeable. The area around them looked red, and there was still swelling from the surgery. The doctor had already warned that this would happen, yet seeing it in person made the situation feel more real. There was also something else that surprised Brian when he saw her for the first time. The eyes were watering heavily. At one point, it even looked like tears mixed with blood were slowly appearing. Something that made the moment feel slightly alarming before the doctor reassured them that it was part of the normal healing process. Amy herself tried to remain optimistic. She knew the results would take time to fully settle, and the most important thing was that the surgery had been successful. Still, the wedding was getting closer with every passing day. As Amy rested and focused on recovering, the rest of the family continued preparing for the ceremony. Dress fittings were taking place, conversations about the event filled the house, and everyone tried to keep things moving forward. Yet even during those moments of preparation, there was one topic that kept coming up. Tammy. Some family members wondered if she would actually attend the wedding. Others hoped the situation between the sisters would improve before the ceremony arrived. Because deep down, everyone understood something important. Amy wanted her sister there. Even if things had been tense recently, the idea of celebrating such a major moment without Tammy felt incomplete. At the same time, Tammy was dealing with her own struggles. Her mental health journey had been difficult, and although she had made progress, there were still moments when the emotional pressure of everyday situations became overwhelming. Crowded spaces could suddenly feel unbearable. Unexpected stress could trigger reactions she did not fully understand in the moment. During one outing with her mother, that pressure became impossible to ignore. They had planned something simple, just a quiet meal together, a chance to spend time, talking and reconnecting after previous disagreements. But when Tammy arrived at the restaurant and saw how crowded it was inside, something shifted. The noise, the movement of people, the feeling of being surrounded. All of it suddenly felt too intense. She stopped at the entrance and hesitated, struggling to explain what she was feeling. Her mother looked confused at first, unsure why Tammy seemed so uncomfortable. But Tammy could already feel the anxiety rising. And in that moment, walking inside felt impossible. Tammy stood there for a moment, staring through the restaurant window while people inside continued their conversations as if nothing unusual was happening outside. Plates clinked, Waiters moved between tables, laughter echoed from one corner of the room to another. 2. Someone else it might have looked like an ordinary busy afternoon. But to Tammy it felt overwhelming in a way that was difficult to explain. Her mother tried to encourage her gently, suggesting they could find a quiet table. Somewhere toward the back. Tammy shook her head almost immediately. The idea of walking into that crowd made her chest tighten. It was not anger or frustration that she felt in that moment. It was something closer to panic, a sudden wave of emotion that made it difficult to focus on anything except the need to step away. She took a few steps back from the entrance, trying to calm herself while explaining what was happening. Her mother listened carefully, though she still seemed surprised by the intensity of Tammy's reaction. Not long ago, Tammy had faced situations like this with confidence. Seeing her hesitate now felt unfamiliar. Tammy eventually admitted that even though her mental health had improved in many ways, certain situations could still trigger that same overwhelming feeling. The medication, adjustments, and therapy had helped her regain balance, but progress did not erase every struggle overnight. Some days were easier than others. This was one of the harder days. Her mother reassured her that there was nothing wrong with taking a step back. The lunch itself was not important. What mattered was Tammy feeling comfortable and safe. They decided to leave and find somewhere quieter instead, somewhere that did not feel so crowded and chaotic. As they walked away from the restaurant, Tammy began explaining what had been on her mind recently. Part of her emotional stress came from the wedding, Amy's wedding. It was difficult to ignore the fact that such an important family event was approaching while their relationship felt uncertain. Tammy wanted to be supportive. She wanted to feel excited for her sister. But every time the subject came up, she also felt a sense of distance that she could not easily shake. She had received the invitation, yet something about the situation still felt incomplete. Tammy admitted that what she truly wanted was a direct conversation with Amy. Not a message passed through someone else, not a formal invitation delivered in a routine way. She wanted to hear her sister say it personally, that she truly wanted her there. Without that reassurance, Tammy found herself questioning everything. She wondered if her presence might cause tension. She worried that showing up could create uncomfortable moments when the focus should be on celebration. The more she thought about it, the more complicated the decision felt. Meanwhile, the rest of the family continued moving forward with the preparations. One of the final steps before the ceremony involved the bridesmaids gathering for their dress fittings. For some of them, this moment was both exciting and slightly unusual. Chris arrived with Misty, Brittany, and the others as they prepared to try on their dresses. The mood inside the fitting room was noticeably lighter than the emotional conversations happening elsewhere in the family. Chris could not help teasing Misty when he saw her dressed in formal clothing. He joked that he could count on one hand the number of times he had ever seen her wearing a dress. Normally, Misty preferred comfort over formal style, so the sight of her preparing for a wedding ceremony brought plenty of playful comments from the group. Misty laughed along with the teasing, though she admitted that dressing up like this felt a little unfamiliar. The conversation quickly shifted to Brittany, who had experienced her own transformation recently. Since undergoing weight loss surgery, she had changed significantly, and that progress was now visible in the way her dress fit. For Brittany, the moment carried a different kind of emotion. She was proud of how far she had come, yet she also remained someone who preferred modest clothing. When she looked at the dress, she quickly began thinking about how she might adjust it to feel more comfortable. Chris noticed immediately and smiled as Brittany explained that she planned to wear a shirt underneath the dress to cover the neckline. Her decision reflected the same quiet personality she had always shown. While others might have focused on fashion or appearance, Brittany cared more about feeling comfortable and true to herself. The family respected that completely. Laughter filled the room again as the group continued trying on dresses and sharing small jokes with each other. For a moment, it almost felt like the entire family was enjoying the preparation together. But even in the middle of that lighter atmosphere, Amy's surgery remained on everyone's mind. They were waiting for an update. Eventually, Chris received the call. Brian's voice came through with the news everyone had been hoping for. The surgery was finished, and everything had gone smoothly. Amy was recovering. The sense of relief spread through the group immediately, no matter what tensions existed. Elsewhere, hearing that Amy was okay mattered most. Chris decided that Tammy should know as well. Even though the sisters were not currently seeing eye to eye, this was still important news. Tammy deserved to hear that her sister had come through the procedure safely. When Tammy answered the phone, Chris shared the update calmly. Amy was out of surgery. The doctors said everything went according to plan. For a moment, Tammy was quiet while absorbing the information. Then she expressed something that revealed how complicated her emotions truly were. She said she was proud of Amy. Despite everything happening between them, she genuinely felt happy that her sister had done something to improve her confidence and well-being. The surgery represented an important step for Amy, and Tammy recognized that. But after saying those words, Tammy admitted something else. She wished things were different between them right now. She wished she could have been there to support Amy during the process, maybe sitting in the waiting room with the rest of the family or offering encouragement before the procedure began. Instead, she felt like she was hearing about everything from a distance. That distance hurt more than she expected. As the conversation ended, Tammy remained thoughtful about what the upcoming wedding might bring. On one hand, she wanted to be there for her sister during such an important moment. On the other hand, she still felt unsure about how welcome she truly was. Back at home, Amy was beginning to recover from the surgery. Her eyes were still red and sensitive, and opening them fully required patience as the healing process continued. The doctors had already explained that this stage was normal, yet Amy could not help thinking about how she might look during the wedding ceremony. She had imagined walking down the aisle feeling confident and relaxed. Now she wondered if the recovery would still be visible by the time the day arrived. Brian tried to reassure her, reminding her that the most important thing was her health and the successful outcome of the surgery. The rest would settle with time. Amy appreciated his encouragement, but the pressure she felt was difficult to ignore. The wedding represented something she had worked toward for months. She had put effort into every detail, hoping to create a day that felt joyful and memorable, yet several uncertainties still hovered in the background. Her eyes were healing, but not fully recovered. Tammy had not confirmed whether she would attend, and family gatherings had always carried the possibility of unexpected drama. Amy sat quietly for a moment, thinking about everything that had happened over the past few days: the surgery, the planning, the conversations she had not yet had with her sister. Despite all those concerns, one thing remained clear in her mind. She still hoped the wedding would bring everyone together. Because after everything the family had experienced over the years, a moment of genuine happiness felt long overdue. The days that followed moved faster than Amy expected. Recovery, preparation, and constant conversations blended together in a way that made it difficult to slow down and process everything happening around her. One moment she was resting with her eyes closed, trying to let the swelling settle, and the next moment someone was asking another question about the wedding schedule. Despite the discomfort, Amy kept reminding herself why she had chosen to move forward. With the surgery so close to the ceremony, she wanted to begin this new chapter of her life without carrying the same insecurities she had lived with for years. Fixing her eyes meant more than improving her appearance. It meant feeling confident standing in front of friends and family on one of the most important days of her life. Still, the healing process required patience. When Amy looked in the mirror, the redness around her eyes was impossible to ignore. The doctors had warned her that this could happen, especially so soon after the procedure. The muscles inside the eyes needed time to adjust, and the visible signs of recovery would not disappear overnight. Brian tried to keep the atmosphere calm while she rested. He could tell Amy was thinking about the wedding constantly, even when she tried not to mention it. Every small detail seemed to carry new meaning now. The ceremony, the photographs, the moment when everyone would be watching her walk down the aisle. He reminded her again that people would not be focusing on the redness in her eyes. They would be focusing on the happiness of the moment. But Amy still felt a quiet pressure building inside her. This wedding mattered deeply to her, not just because it was a celebration, but because it represented a turning point after years, filled with personal struggles and family challenges. For once, she wanted a moment that felt simple and joyful. Yet the closer the ceremony approached, the more questions remained unanswered. One of those questions continued to circle back to Tammy. Amy had heard through family members that Tammy was still uncertain about attending. No. One had received a clear answer from her yet. The invitation had been sent, and technically, everything was settled, but emotionally the situation remained unresolved. Amy could not stop wondering what Tammy was really thinking. She knew their relationship had gone through difficult phases before. They had argued, disagreed, and even distanced themselves from each other at times. But they had also always found their way back eventually. The idea of standing at the altar without her sister present felt strange. Tammy had been part of so many important moments in Amy's life that imagining the wedding without her created a feeling that something essential might be missing. Meanwhile, Tammy continued to struggle with her own thoughts about the situation. After leaving the restaurant with her mother, she had spent several hours reflecting on what she truly wanted to do. The anxiety she experienced earlier that day had not completely disappeared. If anything, it reminded her how sensitive she still felt in crowded or emotionally intense situations. A wedding ceremony could easily become overwhelming. There would be people everywhere, cameras capturing every moment, conversations happening all at once. For someone already managing anxiety, that environment could feel incredibly intense. But at the same time, Tammy knew that avoiding the wedding entirely might create even more distance between her and Amy. That possibility weighed heavily on her mind. For years, their lives had been intertwined in ways few siblings experienced. They had faced public attention together, endured difficult medical journeys together, and supported each other through moments when the outside world felt judgmental or unforgiving. Walking away from the wedding would not just mean missing a ceremony. It could change the emotional balance of their relationship. Tammy sat quietly at home thinking about the invitation again. She replayed earlier conversations in her mind, trying to remember whether Amy had said something she might have misunderstood. Perhaps Amy had assumed Tammy already knew how important her presence was. Perhaps Tammy herself had expected words that Amy simply never thought to say. Sometimes misunderstandings grew larger simply because no one paused to clear them up. The family continued discussing the situation as well. Chris believed that Tammy ultimately wanted to support Amy. From his perspective, the hesitation was not about resentment or jealousy. It was about Tammy feeling unsure of her place in the celebration. Misty shared a similar opinion. She thought Tammy might be waiting for a small gesture from Amy, something that would make her feel genuinely included rather than formally invited. The difficulty was that time was running out. The wedding was now extremely close. Amy was also becoming aware of the growing tensions surrounding Tammy's possible attendance. Even though she tried to focus on recovery and preparation, the subject kept returning in conversations with other family members. One afternoon, she finally spoke openly about her concerns. She explained that she truly hoped Tammy would be there. Despite the disagreements they had experienced recently, she still wanted her sister to witness the moment and share in the celebration. At the same time, Amy admitted that she was nervous about how things might unfold if Tammy did attend. Their emotional history made every family gathering unpredictable. One unexpected comment or misunderstanding could quickly change the atmosphere of an event. Amy had spent months planning this day carefully. The last thing she wanted was for tension between family members to overshadow the ceremony. Yet she also understood that excluding Tammy completely would create an even deeper wound. Balancing those two realities felt almost impossible. The following evening, Amy practiced walking through the basic schedule of the wedding with Brian. They discussed the order of the ceremony, the music that would play, and the way guests would be seated. Each step helped Amy feel slightly more prepared, yet the uncertainty about Tammy lingered quietly in the background. Later that night, Amy sat alone for a moment, reflecting on how much effort she had invested into making this wedding special. She had chosen decorations carefully. She had imagined the photographs she would keep. For years, she had pictured family members smiling together in a way that felt genuine rather than forced. Those dreams were still possible. But she also understood that reality often carried unexpected twists. Family relationships were rarely simple. Tammy continued wrestling with her decision as well. Some moments she convinced herself that attending the wedding would be the right choice, that showing up would demonstrate her support and strengthen the bond she still shared with Amy. Other moments she felt unsure again. She worried about how she might feel standing among guests who expected the sisters to appear perfectly united. She worried that her anxiety might become visible at the worst possible moment. The conflict inside her mind remained unresolved. Meanwhile, Amy's eyes slowly continued healing. Each morning the redness faded slightly, and she found it easier to open them without discomfort. The progress gave her a small boost of confidence. The doctors had been correct that recovery would take time, yet the improvement was noticeable. Brian noticed it too. He told Amy that her eyes already looked straighter than before. Even with the lingering redness, the alignment appeared much better. Hearing that made Amy smile for the first time in several days. Perhaps the timing would not be as disastrous as she feared. Still, the wedding day was approaching rapidly. As the final preparations came together, the entire family could feel the anticipation building. Decorations were prepared, clothing was organized, and the location of the ceremony was almost ready. Everything was falling into place. Everything except one final uncertainty. No one yet knew whether Tammy would walk through the doors when the ceremony began.